Good afternoon. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, October 15th, 2019. Akan Squam, Glasgow, Homish, Aweme. I am Councillor Doug Race, the acting mayor this month, and so we'll be chairing this meeting. Looking for a motion, first of all, to adopt the agenda. Councillor French, second by Councillor Pettengill. All in favor? Nobody opposed? Good start. We have staff reports. Our first is a technology transformation program update. Mr. Ing, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Council. Again, my name is Kerry Ing. I'm the program manager for the District of Squamish, and I'm providing an update in terms of the technology transformation program. The agenda today I'll start off with just providing an overview, a bit of a history to the TTP, discuss and celebrate the accomplishments to date, provide a program status, and then talk about what we will be doing going forward for the remainder of this year and going into 2020 and the subsequent years. And then just a quick summary to wrap it up. So, apologies. I seem to have lost the slide. It's kind of going backwards for me. Yeah, if you don't mind, yeah, no, my apologies.
Never fails.
Never fails. It's ironic being a technology transformation. That's something it's not.
Your program got transformed.
Wow.
Well staged.
Yeah, thank you very much. So actually, I kind of it here. I'm not too sure why it's.
Oh, it's hidden.
It's hidden.
Yeah, just unknown.
Huh. Okay, well,
You can zoom that.
we can zoom this one. Yeah, it is truly ironic that it's technology transformation. And the person who's talking about it is a bit technology literate in terms of this particular deck. So anyway, from an overview perspective, again, this may be, some of you were certainly aware of it, and for those that it's new, I'm top because it was certainly new to me. So the history of the program started in 2014, 2015, give or take, where the district truly, with the leadership of Conrad and the team, truly understood that the existing software systems, the applications that were running the various processes for financial transactions, land management, etc., were nearing end of life. And certainly in need to be upgraded, replaced, or just certainly retired. These systems were truly a barrier to improving the district's overall range and quality of services. These were manual-based systems, these were process paper-based systems that really required a lot of work and a lot of touch points in terms of extracting the necessary data for reports and decision-making. In November 2015, the application technology roadmap, based upon a lot of conversations that were held with various committees within this organization, as well as with several vendors, and our RFQ that went out as well, it was determined that the key systems that needed to be replaced, upgraded, and or procured, financial, development management, recreation, open data, and the list goes on. Ultimately, the systems that were being used in 2015 and 2014 were not going to be able to support the overall growth that the community was having for the organization to take advantage of the new technologies. I'm going to go to the next one and give the mouse because it's still not kind of working. So in 2016, and my apologies in terms of the report, I did say the launch of the Technology Transformation Program was in November of 2016. That was an error on my part. It was really in the beginning of 2016 when, for all intents and purposes, the TTP was off to the races. We had RFPs out, I believe, to vendors for financial systems and development management systems, and vendors were selected around mid-year, and that's when the preparatory work and the planning and design implementation started to go. The intention, the purpose of the TTP, and it still remains, this has been consistent throughout, is give the organization the digital tools to deliver outstanding service, because as talked about before, the legacy systems, which some are still in place, are manual-based, process-intensive, paper-based, require a lot of work just to get a simple answer from it. Ultimately, the TTP is about modernizing software systems and processes to address immediate and future requirements. And ideally, we'll be selecting and implementing systems in order to keep pace with the demands for information, which are growing rapidly, as we all know, just given the pace of change within the community, improve the overall business processes, and gain operational efficiencies. I hope this works. Okay. So one of the key things that I really want to relay is that, as per the report, I just want to stress that yes, from the original intention, it's not where it wanted to be, but a lot of work and a lot of accomplishments have been made within this overall program in the last few years. First and foremost, the framework, the foundation in terms of how the data gets transmitted from one site to another, as well as the compute process power within the system to make sure that the data can get there. So Conrad and his team certainly created a robust, scalable network for site-to-site digital communications, virtualized network servers, and I have an additional slide that provides a bit more information in terms of the importance of that particular initiative. The Squamish Open Data Portal, small wins as they were called, but they were still substantial in terms of complexity and level of effort that was required for fleet tracking, public emergency notification, fire inspection, and incident upgrade. The implementation of the new finance system, so again, the reduction of the reliance and risk associated with the current one. It was implemented about a year ago, and it is being used from core financial services, and the plan is to continue to develop and utilize the system to truly get off the previous one. The integration of GIS, the Geographical Information System, with a new land management database, so parcel and property information are single-click, if not double-click visibility in terms of web maps and tools within the system, and improved workflows and the implementation of land and development management systems. Although we're not there yet in terms of implementing live, a lot of work has gone on within the various departments, planning, engineering, and building, in terms of getting their processes ready to start adopting and accepting the new system, so once it goes live, there won't be as big of a disruption in terms of their overall operational processes. The accomplishments today would never have been done without the team, and this team is actually, I'm still new here, to say the very least. I'm less than 2 months old, but what I've seen, what I've observed, what I've learned, is you have a bunch of Jedis that are working within this crew. They're dedicated, they're talented, most importantly, they get a level of fortitude that is enviable. This program, there's lots of opportunity for project fatigue, just from all the constant change that goes forward. And the team that is working on TTP initiatives should be celebrated, because the accomplishment dates have been significant. First and foremost, this team has completed we're starting to complete the TTP Foundation. And the foundation really is the jump-off point, or the leveraging of the finance system, development management system, to start using other applications and processes to actually start really leveraging and taking advantage of technology for operational improvements and the offering of new services. So that foundation is about getting the people ready. In terms of the change, start identifying and making changes within the existing operational processes to start taking advantage of the software, and then just the technology. The vendors have been selected for the finance and development system, and we have an idea in terms of who will be selecting going forward for the other systems. At the very least, we know the process to follow to make sure that we get the right candidate. So, a bit of a nerd alert on this one. So we got server virtualization and open data. So those are the two items within the accomplishments that I think need to have a bit more discussion, just in terms of the significance of it. So server virtualization, if you're not aware, it's actually just virtualizing or using software to create a server environment within a physical box. So where there was 70, so back in 14 and 15, last check, Gary Sims let me know there's about 70 physical boxes that were sprinkled throughout the organization in the various locations. We are now down to less than 10. Last count, it could be 8 or 9. So those 8 or 9 physical servers are doing the job of 70. And so in addition to the reduction in terms of overall emissions and requirements in terms of running those particular devices, the level of agility and nimbleness it gives to the IT department in terms of starting a brand new server, in terms of turning one down and then restarting it, is you can't really compare how fast and how nimble it is in comparison to needing to procure a brand new system or finding an existing box and you can repurpose, and also via software. So you can start loading, you can start testing applications much quicker than you ever could be before. Open data through the GIS portal. This allows the public to actually use the data that we've collected, that we put out there, to make their own maps. So it's a public consumable tool that has been used and been populated throughout not only Squamish but with other municipalities, with BC and Canada and the States. And it's incredibly popular. It's particularly we have individuals who are super interested in our trails, the mountain bike trails, for example, how they want to use the information for their property, or whatever searches. This is information that's truly available to the public. Program status. So, as per the report, we are not where we want to be as per the original intent. So, still kind of in the non-presentation mode. So I can hand this out. So the application technology roadmap was created in, I believe, the late summer, spring or late summer, autumn of 2015. The application technology roadmap identified, as talked about earlier, all the systems that needed to be replaced, all the systems that were legacy and causing, for all intents and purposes, a bit of pain, that needed to be upgraded because they were aging, there's a level of risk associated to it, and there's new technologies that would be able to help the organization gain, for lack of better words, operational efficiencies. What you're looking at here, the original, what we're looking at the slide, is the intent for the TTP was to have everything complete by the end of 2019. Currently, well, we're not necessarily there, and that's because of just all the changes that have gone on. Perhaps we were, actually I'll just stop right there. So this provides a bit of information in terms of where we're currently at. So the original intent was to have all of these items complete by the end of 19. But this is where we're currently at. So the top two I would consider as fundamental or foundational in terms of the TTP because of the finance system and the development system. Target for completion, and completion is the wrong word, and I only mean that because we will launch and continually to update, improve, and get new functionality out of it. The idea being in 2020 these things will be live, and we'll be utilizing it and continuing to improve the systems. 2021 going forward, this is when we'll make the time to actually start changing out the other systems, in particular the recreation management system, as we're currently on a legacy service from a vendor called Active Networks, from Class. We do need to replace that at the end of this year, starting into 2021, end of 20, going into 21. And then the other services, asset management, work management, complaints, etc., all to be considered in 2021 and going forward. On the assumption that in 2020 we can complete the objectives that I've identified in the report that I'll talk about in this presentation. A bit more information in terms of the chart that I provided in the report, our current budget and our current actuals. So in 2019, I think to date, we're about 2.7 or 2.8 million. In terms of percentage to complete, we're in the neighborhood, and again, it's a bit of an educated guess at this point. It's about 40 to 45% completion as per the original objectives of the technology transformation program. At the end of 2020, we have budgeted for $1 million, I believe, so the intention is to spend all of that to get to a level about 70 to 80% complete in terms of the original TTP initiatives. To get to the remainder of the objectives identified in the TTP, the anticipation is it'll take us another couple of years, getting to the end of 22, 23, with the anticipation forecasted number of an additional 25 to 30% of the original ask to take us about 5.125 million for the completion of all the objectives identified in the TTP. So the next question is, okay, well, why? Why has it taken as long as it had? We've been doing this for some time now. We're in 2019. We started this in 2016. Should we be further along the path? Again, I will be. This is the only other time I'll be using my newbie card. Again, I'm only about 2 months old. I've had plenty of conversations, but not nearly enough to know the full history or the context in terms of where we're at. But it seems based on the interviews I've had with senior leaderships, people on the team, and people surrounding the team too, it just seems that when we started this particular activity, the organization wasn't ready for the overall disruption that this was going to occur, or this was going to have. And what I mean by that is that in order to maintain service levels and do technology-based projects, and truly understanding how we currently do business, the amount of effort, the process that's involved, the amount of information needs to be collected, what the new systems can do, really requires a level of dedicated resources that were not available at the time, nor was the organization, I believe, resilient enough to actually make those resources ready because of finally just making sure that the light stayed on from an operational perspective. But a lot of things came at us that were completely unknown. Scopes did change. Certain priorities may have shifted. There were challenges within the IT department only in terms of the cybersecurity event that occurred earlier this year that all took resources and focus away from the TTP. I'd also suggest too that the organizational, and then going forward to change, the organization may not have been ready for the change. Were people actually ready and understood the true purpose of the TTP? Were they ready and willing to start making change in terms of their processes, moving away from paper into technology at that particular time? So again, it's based on my observations. I am not, I am less than 2 months old. But I do think the state of readiness back in 2016 and 17 going forward in TTP was not where we wanted to be for, and was one of the reasons why we're not where we wanted to be from the original plan. I don't want to say that misery truly loves company, but we're certainly not alone in this regard, as there's plenty of studies online, whether it's the Harvard Business Review and or others, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, MIT Sloan Taker Pick, is that digital transformations tend not to achieve, on average, what the original intents were going to be. And the reasons for that are numerous. First and foremost, the pace of technology change is rapid, to say the very least. And I think also, too, the focus of organizations can be on the technology itself and the improvements it's going to make versus focusing on the people and the implications it's going to have on their day-to-day work tasks, and how do we help them get behind the program so that they become champions of this change versus being pulled along. So with all that being said, here's our current status. And I did mention earlier that the digital foundation is, I don't want to say necessarily built, but it's really close. And that foundation is only from a technology perspective. Processes are actually getting a bit more fine-tuned, and the people are getting more ready for change itself. So lessons learned and forward progress. Well, some of the changes that we'll be implementing will be a new governance model to help streamline decision-making and ultimately strengthen communications, both internally and externally, so more conversations with the groups impacted, both directly and indirectly for the particular projects, as well as ensuring that those on the senior leadership team and core leadership team are not only aware of the change, but are supportive to help protect their individuals in terms of the overall process is going to be required. Formalizing change management practice, and this is thematic through all the research I've done in terms of why some of the technology transformations, the digital transformations have not achieved as much as they would like to, is because the focus was on technology. What's the new toy versus the people? What's their current workflow? What's important to them? What's their aptitude in terms of change? What's their concerns with the change? Let's figure that out. Let's figure that out before we start rolling out the process, before we start rolling out technology, so that they are right away champions of the change versus needing to be pulled along and not really understanding the true purpose. Improving resiliency. We currently are a bit reliant on our contractors, and if the contractors have lack of continuity in terms of who we're dealing with, and this has certainly occurred with the contractors we've dealt with, is that we are twisting in the wind a little bit. So the goal for the year coming up and going forward is improve the overall self-sufficient resiliency of the teams, not only from project management expertise, technical capabilities, so becoming increasingly knowledgeable and capable within the systems that we're using, as well as operational processes, identifying the areas prior to the implementation, identifying the areas that may be redundant, that may be duplicate. How can we shore that up so we can create the necessary breathing room so the individuals tasked with rolling of the TTP can make time in their day. Agile in thinking, adaptive in practice, respond and adapt to change versus sticking to a plan. I think sticking to a plan and its original intent can be a bit of a challenge, only in the sense that because of the pace of change, because of the shifting priorities, because of the things that have happened, we need to adapt. We need to be more responsible to that, because what was designed back in 2015 or 2016 may not be applicable anymore. We certainly have to evaluate that. Ambitious yet obtainable. Ultimately, in 2020, let's finish what we started. We've got great progress so far on the two key pillars that I've identified earlier, so let's finish that, because if we don't finish those, then the TTP objectives past that is greater than it already is, to say the very least. So our objectives for the remainder of this year and then for 2020 is the ongoing development, just get better at using and utilizing the finance system. So that goes from the finance department to OIT to building, planning, engineering, everyone that has visibility into the system to contribute more to make it a better leverage tool. So it gives us more accurate data. There's cross-functional or cross-departmental input in terms of how the system can be better for all users, so that can be leveraged throughout the organization. And then going into 2020, the 4 items that I've identified before data governance, all of these are in flight in various shapes and forms. A lot of work has gone into all of them in terms of getting us ready, having the technology, the configurations ready, and now moving into change management, making the individuals, those impacted by it, are going to be ready for the change as well. Payroll and timesheeting has been going on for some time, and that's intentional only because it's the one project that I jumped on board with that touches literally everybody. It's the one project that we cannot have a level of error attached to this one because we are talking about pay. So we're rolling this out with deliberation, with cautiousness, making sure that the affected departments are aware of the change and buy into the change and can help us actually train their fellow peers in terms of making sure that the entry of time sheeting is done correctly first time around so that the number of deficiencies and number of errors are minimized, so we just keep on improving from there. Land and development management, a lot of work has been done within the 3 departments, building, engineering, and planning, getting them ready to such a point that they've actually been identifying the business processes that are a bit duplicate, that are a bit redundant, and they're improving and streamlining those so they're in anticipation of the implementation of the new system, going live with it, hopefully in the first half of the year. Following these will be digital procurement, so the use of UBW in terms of the issuance and tracking and payment for suppliers, all within the same system, reducing the number of touch points that are currently involved with payment of suppliers, development management, financial integration, so that's greater linkage between our development management tool and our finance tools. So now that we're dealing with, for all intents and purposes, a single system versus multiple systems and multiple touch points, define operational efficiencies, and most importantly, have single and or double click visibility in terms of the real-time numbers. And data governance. Data governance is, we haven't started this one, but this one is truly exciting and also a little bit on the terrifying side. And what I mean by that is that we have an asset known as data. And it is as valuable in my 2-month-old period of as value as anything that we have within the organization. Data actually gives us information in terms of how we're doing with our service levels, gives us information in terms of how we're doing from a financial reporting perspective. But the challenge that we have, though, it's in various levels of states of revenues, and it's actually in various hard drives amongst the organization. So what we need to do as a district, and this is led by Kate within economic development, is we have to get a better understanding in terms of what data we have, where it's currently stored, how do we want to configure it so it's available for everyone, not only staff but also for the public, what's the rules around the data, how do we collect it, how do we retain it, what's the retirement hence depletion model, and then how do we make sure that the rest of the organization, those in the organization, be it change management, is aware of this change and why we're doing it in terms of being better data stewards. The idea being for the delivery of this project is have that framework in place by this time next year, kind of the end of next year. So ultimately going forward in 2021, all the data we'll be collecting going forward, and it is by the marine, massive amounts, have a level of governance and stewardship so that everything we collect, we know there's a value attached to that record. And if there's no value attached to it, whether it's transitory or otherwise, it gets deleted because if anything, it adds a bit of noise. Risk mitigation, and again, these are some of the things that we just have to identify. This is not exhaustive in the least. There's going to be things coming at us that are probably both known and some will be unknown as the days go forward. But again, it's all about operational readiness. So those departments that will be impacted, we need to have the conversations right now in terms of here comes the change. Tell us about how you're doing businesses. Tell us about your concerns about this particular change so we can actually start adopting those process changes so that once we have the system in place, will be less painful, to say the least, because nothing ever goes super smooth, but it can be a lot less bumpy, and it starts right now in terms of having those conversations. Continual development and utilization of the new finance system, this is critical. If we cannot continue to move forward with the finance system, and we cannot get the necessary traction within the finance system, all things stop. And what I mean by that is because it is absolutely integral in terms of the overall program itself. Those things that link into it, well, if it's not ready to be linked in, we can't move forward because there's a bit of duplicate work that's going to occur. That being said, if that's the case, there are other things that we can tackle, but we do have to focus on that finance system. Increase self-sufficiency, again, contractors can just change. So we need to make sure that we have the necessary in-house power, the in-house muscle, so that whether it's project management and or configuration and or operational processes, etc., that it's in-house. Again, we reduce our reliance and risk associated with external parties. Recognizing and combating TTP fatigue. This has been going on for a while. The team is amazing. They're super gritty. At the same time, we have to recognize this is an extensive program, and there's going to be a lot of roadblocks that are coming their way, and they've hit the wall a couple of times. So we have to recognize that and do what we can to support. Focus, formalized system development. What I mean by this is I talked earlier about completion, and completion is just truly the wrong word, only in the sense that once it's done, that just means we've started. So that we have to tackle the deficiencies, we have to tackle a warranty, we have to make sure that the systems that we've invested in, currently they are Ferraris in first gear. We have to make sure that we do the necessary due diligence, get them to second to third, so that we truly optimize the overall investment. From a summary. So the TTP's purpose is and always should be, give the tools to deliver outstanding service, the digital tools. To date, as originally intended, are we where we want to be? No. And because of that, we will be expecting additional budget requests in 21. That being said, is that the team that's been working on this, both directly and indirectly, should be celebrated. They're absolute rock stars in terms of what they've been able to accomplish and the challenge that's been in front of them and the capability that they have going forward. Speaking about going forward, how we will make change and how we will actually deliver and finish what's been started and go forward with the other initiatives, whether they're from the original plan and otherwise. So we're going to adopt the lessons learned, make the necessary changes. We're going to focus on a state of readiness and be in change management, formalize change management. We're just going to get tougher, build more internal muscles in terms of resiliency and self-sufficiency. We're going to have ambitious yet attainable goals. We're going to finish what's been started. And we're going to be increasingly agile, accepting and adapting to change. So with that, thank you for your time and consideration.
Whew. Council, this is time for questions, comments. Councillor Anderson.
Our new council visited the emergency command center, if you like, last winter at the RCMP headquarters, and I recently visited a similar center in Kamloops, and it strikes me that there's a lot of IT implications to the operation of such a facility. I wondered whether being emergency preparedness for the District of Squamish is something that is a lens to apply to what you have presented, or are there specific initiatives in that area that could be highlighted? I do see a reference to the fire system and updating that on this roadmap sheet. But I wondered, since all I see is a bank of computers, and I'm told that each of these facility visits how important and critical this is, and vulnerable potentially.
For sure. Just to clarify on the question, is EOC going to be part of TTP, or
is there a emergency preparedness lens to apply to system improvements, or are there specific initiatives to address emergency preparedness?
That I don't know. In terms of a lens to apply on TTP, I think absolutely, we could certainly consider something like that, and I'd want to have conversations with Conrad to see if something like that has already been done. In terms of EOC and applications, I think it's worth considering having that its own program, because I think technology in EOC or emergency management should be in lockstep with technology, because technology, particularly GIS, can provide real-time information, assuming that the network is still available, but you can certainly provide real-time information in terms of where criticalities could be, or where criticalities are, and then the necessary evacuation and/or management plans that would need to be enforced.
And I'll go to Ms. Golbeck as well.
Yeah, just to chime in on that, because Carrie's only been here for 2 months. There is, through the Emergency Management Program, a business continuity plan that speaks to information and system continuity in the event of an emergency. So that's being built into all of the different systems. As we go through the different departments that are being affected by TTP, there is a business continuity lens that's put on that, led by our Emergency Management Department.
Thank you.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. Thanks for coming in today and for the update. I appreciate the slide that we're not alone in this. I think that it is commonplace for organizations to jump into this without the organizational readiness piece and not fully understanding what the scope of the work is. So appreciate the update to date and the steps that are being taken to move us forward. My question is, going back to the application technology roadmap, that's kind of when the environmental scan was done, and there's a detailed solutions diagram in that document about kind of these steps that were identified
Okay.
as that should be part of the TTP. And that was done back in 2016. And so thinking of how quickly technology changes and these kind of programs and processes change, I'm just curious if that will be reviewed at all, or if you think that needs to be reviewed at all in terms of like where the priorities are or which pieces of the system need to be part of.
Yes, unconditionally, because it was done in 2015. In 2016, I think a lot of the work is still relevant in terms of what is required, however. I think once we get past having the finance system and the development system in place, which I think were identified in the application roadmap as kind of the foundational pieces, we certainly should reassess what's next on the list.
A couple things, just on the finance system. Are we using a new system at this point? Are we still at selection? Are we at data, digital, and or paper migration? Like, where are we on the finance piece especially?
Christina, I'm relying on your assistance on this as well. So we have implemented UBW, Unicorn Business Growth, as a new finance system that was implemented about a year ago. The core financials that are being used by UBW include general ledger, as well as accounts payable, and a couple other modules that Christina, I'm hoping to give more context to. We are still using our existing financial system, which is known as MAZE, and for the life of me, I do not know what that acronym means, so I apologize on that. But that is still in place in terms of the other financial transaction requirements that we have within the organization. So we have picked a vendor. They've been in place now for a year, and the intention is to continue to leverage and utilize that module, the modules within UBW, the finance system, and increasingly reduce our reliance and risk associated with the previous one.
Follow up or?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And the reason why there hasn't been like a hard cutover is we're still migrating data, we're adjusting processes, like where, why, for example, tomorrow, aren't we just on UBW exclusively?
What we found over the last couple of years, the level of complexity is strong, to say the very least. I think what the team has done, and I wholeheartedly support and would do the same, is take a very cautious approach in terms of rolling out the finance system in modules. So having the core financial system in place to do your general ledger as well as your accounts payable was the first step. The next step is payroll, and the amount of how it could go wrong is significant. So we've been very cautious in terms of rolling that out because it's currently being utilized or being done through the existing system. And then following that will be, again, increasing the use of UBW. So not only will payroll be taken care of, but then also other things such as procurement will go through unconditionally in the new system. Again, removing the reliance, the risk associated with the previous one. So I think to answer your question, it's a very staged approach, just given how integral that system above any other system is for the organization itself. If we were to do something else, for example, the recreation system, it would be more of a rip and replace for sure. But because the finance system is so integral to all parts of the organization, it's been a deliberate staged approach.
Mary Elliott. And then Councilor Anderson.
Thank you for your presentation. One of the things we talked about at the start of this project with the last council was, is there a way to measure the benefits of all this hard work and investment on behalf of the taxpayer? So what new services become available because we spent, after 2021, $5 million? How have we improved processing times? There will be internal benefits and external, and I don't think we're really able to communicate that well yet. But I think it's an important part to be able to say to the community, this is why we move away from paper-based systems to a digital-based system that, has its growing pains. But obviously, our public should see something different at the end of this, our staff should experience something different. I'm just wondering if there's a way to capture that.
There was benchmarking activities that occurred, I think a year or two ago, and I do need to have further conversations with individuals involved with that to see what was being looked at, and then provide probably a more educated answer to you on that. My thoughts is for starters, we'd want to get a better understanding about existing cycle times. So how long does it currently take us to pay a supplier, for example, or how long does it take us to actually complete the overall payroll run? And have that as a baseline and take a look at how we do once the new systems are in place and see where the gains are. How long does it take us to issue a permit? So these are all the processes that are being, for instance, purposes, not necessarily replaced, but being changed via the new digital tools. So I'd want to start, for example, I'd want to have conversations about that, and what's our existing cycle time as the baseline, and see what improvements could be. And then I'd also want to follow up the conversation in terms of, okay, now that the foundations are in place, what services can we offer to the public via online, mobile, that we currently cannot do? And then establish or get an understanding in terms of the overall benefit to allow the public to do business with the municipality on their time versus needing to do it in ours.
Do you think our organization remembers the purpose of why we were doing this? Given we're 3 years in, the piece around the surface? Or do you think it just feels like a technology project? I had a good conversation with another department just in terms of their challenges with the existing process and using kind of the manual processes. One of the first questions I had was, do you know what TTP stands for? Do you know what the original purpose of the Technology Transformation Program was? And I think one or two people actually raised their hand and answered it they answered it with their opinion of it, and I thought was pretty close. But the remainder of the group kind of struggled, I would suggest. So I think one of the big challenges and part of the opportunities that we have is not necessarily rebranding, but part of change management to actually remind, if not introduce, the purpose of the program and the purpose of the individual portfolios that make up the program. Why are we doing this? I think paper is currently works. So we have to actually make sure that we're ahead of that to say this is the intention and here's the benefits, not only for the community and the organization, but what is in it for them. And that's something that I don't know about the overall history, but to date, I think we certainly can learn from maybe things that were done or not done, and then make sure that the organization's aware, the staff members are aware of the intention, not only of the program, but each of the portfolios that make up the program. So obviously part of our role is risk management. So given that we are not as far along as we hope we would be by this point, what are you recommending in terms of council's oversight of this project? Like, should we be checking with you quarterly now? If we go back to that slide about the things that you need to work on, including making sure people don't have TTP for T, we shouldn't have TTP either. We need to stay on top of this. And so what is the role of council to support you in moving this to a successful conclusion?
If you don't mind, yeah.
I can do that. I'll help carry out here. That's a great question, Mayor Elliott. Thank you. With this new update and the reinvigoration, I guess is a word I would use in terms of the purpose of the organization, being clear about where we are in the process and potential for more budget, assuming we're going to do the whole roadmap. Council's role, I see us updating. I don't know if quarterly. I think what we'll do is talk to council about how much is enough, depending on the cadence of the project, if quarterly is too repetitive or if it's fast enough. And then ultimately would be support with the community as we keep council more up to date on the detail of the project in terms of its value, its purpose, and that community interface in addition to staff ultimately would be council's buy-in to this investment. And our role will be to ensure that council has, as we work more with Carrie, what is that ROI for the community? What is it? What's in it for the community? So I think I see it being a change management of the community as well. I don't know exactly what that looks like at this point.
But I would also say that the frequency with which is being discussed at this table signals to the organization that this is something that we're watching very closely and trying to support the effort on the ground. So I'll just throw that in for consideration.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson, Councillor Pettengill.
Yes, if I'm not, if I understood properly, you mentioned that the Economic Development Department, Kate Mulligan, Economic Development Officer, has a role in the Data Governance Framework initiative. I just wondered if you might be able to elaborate on that. What I'm interested in is data warehouse is referred to here. Is the goal to improve services in support of economic development, or are there other tie-ins to the department? If you could elaborate on that connection.
Thank you, Chair. I can answer that, given my history with economic development and this open data project. So just to remind council and the public, what happened with economic development was looking into data specific to economic development and providing open data to that element of our service. At the same time that GIS and planning and communications were looking into open data for general benchmarking for the organization. We combined forces between economic development, specifically in the rest of the measurement that we're doing with the OCP, with Kate's knowledge and passion, and Christina Moore and Sarah McJanet. We have a cross-functional, cross-departmental team working on open data and how we're leveraging it for the different uses. And because open data ties into the TTP, that was the reference there.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Pettengill, Councillor French.
So just thinking out loud a bit, and I guess riffing a little bit off of Mayor Elliott's comments, what I've sort of been wondering is if it would make more sense to kind of, I guess, in my mind, the server virtualization, the open data piece are kind of cross-organizational. They're sort of infrastructure pieces specific to IT or in their wheelhouse, and I would put the data policy piece in there as well. But I'm wondering if the other things really maybe don't belong as a TTP, because I mean that kind of implies an older, in my mind, methodology for approaching software and technology, where you kind of do this massive design, figure out the whole thing, and then you spend a long time rolling out the perfect solution because stuff will move so quickly. It's obsolete by the time you get there, and people have gone more to an agile thing where you're doing smaller chunks constantly. It's never perfect, and you're always moving forward little pieces. Kind of along that same lines, if the financial management team or the finance team was sort of, we were giving objectives like, this is the sort of reporting we expect around budget, the reporting we expect quarterly. In our data policy, we expect this data to be available across the organization. So some sort of outcomes, objectives like that. And then it's up for financial management to come to us with their budget, to go to IT and say, this is the support we need to make this happen. And it goes that way. So it's not IT imposing a technology project on finance. It's finance saying, like, we have some objectives we have to make. IT, we need your help to get these done. And at the end of the day, you may still be purchasing the same and implementing the same software, but it's just how people are thinking about it and how it happens a little bit. And I just wonder if something like that would help us be a little bit more successful. And the other piece to that in my mind is, I wonder if, because right now financial management, and I make some assumptions here, but doesn't have to worry so much about the scheduling of the TTP piece of it, because that's IT's responsibility. Whereas if finance has a bunch of outcomes they have to meet, they have to sort of schedule that in their own work planning with all the other things they're having to do, and then maybe that moves along more appropriately for the task, the outcomes they need to provide. And so it's maybe a different way of thinking about some of the same sorts of things. I wonder if there's any value in there. Just sort of my reaction from what I've heard.
Are you suggesting more of an agile model? And are you also just suggesting a specific department leading a particular implementation?
I guess two pieces, maybe one a bit more of an agile model possibly, but also, the general, something like server virtualization, I think that belongs in IT as an IT budget item. But, the upgrades to the financial management system, even though it touches other departments, if that piece needs to be owned by finance, and if there's a database for recreation, if the sort of outcomes needs to be owned by recreation and they come to IT with a request, and then IT will come to us and say, well, we have all these people wanting all these services from us, so we need a budget to do it. But it just sort of switches, how it happens.
I understand.
And, just food for thought maybe, or it's just sort of my reaction as I'm listening today.
So, is there an answer, or is there a comment to that?
I don't know if it was necessarily a question as much as a...
Is that a comment or a question?
Yeah, musing, and maybe you have some thoughts, or maybe just something to think about, or I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Council did say they didn't need this to be wrapped up in a bow. I told Carrie that. I said, don't wait till you're here for 6 months. They want an update right away. So I'll jump in and help a little bit as well. And in sort of response to Councillor Pettingill's suggestion, each element that touches, say, the Tempest module that touches land development, or class that touches recreation, as each of those projects is implemented, the project sponsor is actually the manager of that department. And with Carrie here, we are looking at resetting what's going well, what's not. I know that with finance, as an example, Christine has been absolutely instrumental in essentially leading that side of it. So the processes behind the technology occurred with finance first. So heard the suggestion, great point. I think we're partly there in terms of the managers of the departments really work with IT on what they need and what processes are theirs. Bringing Carrie in means that it's an organizational program manager and not that it sits entirely with IT, because we've learned that it's not an entirely IT project. So I hope that helps shed some more light on, we're keeping our eyes, we're alive to that.
Councilor Frencher.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Welcome to the team. You had mentioned briefly about the cyber threat that we experienced, and I'm interested to know, in relation to the bigger project, is the cyber threat element handled and managed at this point, or is it an ongoing situation that continues to track resources from the bigger project?
You can answer that without giving away any state secrets.
So I don't want to speak to what had occurred. I'd rather have Conrad speak to it directly. But what I can say to the second point of your question was that cybersecurity is a constant threat. And I think that in addition to the TTP and all initiatives, there has to be vigilance, not only among IT, but in the systems that they use and we use, but vigilance amongst the organization in terms of how all of us present a threat to the organization as well. So from an ongoing perspective, I think that what had occurred certainly raised the awareness within the organization, and I think it is an opportunity to ensure that the systems and the individuals are increasingly vigilant of the overall threat on an hourly, minutely basis that it presents. But in terms of what had happened and how it's been contained and managed, really that's what I've heard to date has been absolutely extraordinary from the team with the efforts that they did, but really is for Conrad to speak to.
And any comments, Council? We have a moment if you wish to make comments.
Well, I guess
Councilor
a question just sort of following from my musing. Does staff have enough clarity about our expectations in terms of outcomes of all of this as a council, in terms of, at budget time, what do we expect? And when we ask for numbers like this, that, or the other thing, what level of detail and what kind of turnaround or anything, have we provided enough clarity on that sort of thing? Or is there an opportunity to, I guess, because I guess in my mind, at the end of the day, that's kind of why we're doing this. And/or because, as Mayor Elliott said, the public's going to expect a quicker turnaround on this, that, or the other thing. And so have we clarified well enough what our expectations are for you to deliver to those expectations?
Through the chair, I can't speak to, maybe Christine can weigh in at the beginning of this project. I do believe that the vendors met with council, but I'm not sure. But ultimately, the goal at this point is to provide best practice reporting. With council, I think I'd like to talk to staff about how we would do this in terms of council's expectations. Because the way I look at it is best practice on what we can provide council for reporting based on what systems can provide, what's going to be most useful to council. I don't know if Christine, you want to weigh in on whether we actually go to council and ask at this point, what would you like, rather than relying on staff to provide what we believe are best practices.
I think through the chair, just trying to weigh in, and maybe a lot of thoughts are going through my brain, so please bear with me. First being the key behind the ATR to begin with, in response to your question, I believe was Conrad's attempt, or IT's attempt, but was IT's attempt to balance all of those requests they were getting all over the organization for support from IT to do projects. And the ATR was intended to be a prioritization process corporately, because I want to please council, so I want certain things. Development wanted to please council, they wanted to do certain things. So I think that was fundamentally the point behind ATR to begin with. Does it need to be reviewed and revising? Absolutely. That would be my first feedback to everybody on the team was, it's time to relook at this. I don't know that those are still the priorities. Having said that, finance, we use this, we've given the same weight to finance as all these other projects. Finance is multiple modules, many things. We had systems in place already. It's AP, it's banking, it's GL, it's project management. It's every point of sale that we have in recreation, development management, land sale, all of those things. It's not one module that we're plugging in and putting in. The time that was given to do that project was not realistic. Our team works really hard. We absolutely know what this corporation's intent is for us. And my staff are breaking their backs, as is IT and all the people that we touch, trying to get that in place so that we can put the platform that's needed for all the other systems to come into us. I don't think it's a concern. I have no concern that council's not giving us enough direction or isn't supportive enough or isn't. That has never been my concern in this project. It is just truly the recognition of the resources that's required. Now because it's being delayed and issues are coming around that, there is some extra cost potentially. But if we build the platforms right, then we might be able to save some costs later on with the attachments. So those are all just part of all the things going through my head. Please bear with me. Hopefully that addresses some of your concern that's expressed here. Certainly from our perspective, we absolutely know how important this project is, and we've been frankly killing ourselves to get it there.
Chris?
Yeah, well, if I may, I just, I can appreciate people are working really hard, and I guess I would be, it does strike me that maybe some review of priorities does make sense if people are having to kill themselves to get it done, and we're, sliding on the time frame. Maybe it is a time to sort of look at, do we have the priorities right here? Because I don't think we want people to be killing themselves.
And if I may, I do go back to the ATR quite regularly. I think there's one or two modules that maybe if we put it back to the corporation now and said, do you still want to do this before this? Maybe they wouldn't feel the same way. But we also have end-of-life issues, and so recreation has to go next because we also have the technology piece that drives that as well. So I think we do that. One of the things I'm hoping Carrie is going to go back and do is do some of that rejig, make sure those things still make sense, make sure the governance structure does allow the sponsors for those various areas to truly weigh in and help drive that process. There has been things around that and then resourcing issues. But I don't think it's a concern. I'm certainly not concerned that you're not giving me enough direction. I do think there's probably aspects of this in business process development where we could have asked you more questions about that in building what we're trying to build. And more time to do that would have been great. But I don't feel that that's a key point.
So I have a question, which I'm nervous about because when it comes to computers, I'm what's known as the lowest common denominator. But you mentioned reviewing some of the original software and so forth, and it seems to me when you have rapidly changing technology, at some point on a project like this, you have to say, okay, that's enough in this direction. You have to get on with the rest of the project, because if you keep going back and changing, you sort of have to reset the whole project and you almost never get finished. And how do you deal with that?
Through the chair. What we're talking about is scope creep for all intents and purposes. And it happens, I guess, in all projects in terms of you're identifying the requirements at the beginning of the project, and as you move forward, you learn new things and you learn new functionalities in our systems that you may not have been aware of when you started it. So that actually kind of to your point, it creates more work and it creates longer delays and it creates over budget requirements sometimes. I think what has occurred so far is that project management that has been in place has been pretty strong in terms of maintaining that or minimizing that, but it has occurred, there's no doubt, only because I think the requirements that were collected at the beginning of the project were not truly representative of what we learned 2 or 3 years after the fact. So how to defend against it, because I think it's always going to be, for all intents and purposes, a necessary evil, is what I would actually relay what Councillor Pettingrill had said in terms of trying a different model. A different model being sort of something that's a bit more incremental and iterative versus something that's known as waterfall. So start using more agile, for all intents and purposes, techniques, so that you start identifying, or right away you recognize that I know the least amount of project at the beginning, and you start iterating in smaller chunks. So you identify what the immediate requirements are, and then you move forward on that. And as you learn, you actually continue to actually start making improvements or start making changes that are relevant to the system itself. So that, I recognize that is not a good answer, and I apologize on that. But ultimately what it does, it actually reduces overall scope, because you're making changes in, for instance, for shorter increments. So for example, as when the original plan of having a list of business requirements on day 1 and not necessarily making any changes until the end of the year, you're identifying that what you've actually released is no longer relevant. So with a more sort of iterative approach, you're actually identifying the work that needs to be done in a much shorter increment. You have goalposts for that particular end. So that you get to that particular end, you identify what was learned, is it still relevant, and then you move forward in terms of what work needs to be done that gets you to the next finished product. But ultimately you're talking about is limiting project scope creep. And that certainly is, again, a necessary evil. And I think by actually evaluating how we're doing things, identifying where that occurred, and then adjusting appropriately so that we can defend against it, should minimize it. We'll never eliminate it, but it should minimize it, and then hopefully get closer in terms of the expectations that council, management, and staff have.
So, Council, we're more or less at the scheduled time. Any final comments? Well, I'll make one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And I will say that as one of the councillors who was on council last term, I think, we now, I think, have a better idea of the nature of the beast. And at that time, we did know that this was going to be extensive and foundational, and it was a real, almost a culture change, if you like, for the organization. So, so not surprising that there's the odd hiccup here. We just have to work through them. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Change seats.
And we have one more item on the agenda, the mayor's update. 3 sub 2. Do you need a minute to set up, Karen?
No, should be ready to go.
Okay. So this item is agenda item 3 sub 2. It's under the heading of Mayor's Update. But this is particular to Hearts in the Ice trip to Norway. Mayor Elliott, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a different place in which to speak to you all. So thank you for indulging me. Councillor Race has given me half an hour on the committee of the whole, so I can't show you all 872 pictures that I took while I was in Norway, which you're probably all very happy about. But I did want to talk about why I went to Norway and just share a little bit about what I learned when I was there and how it might influence our approach on the climate change discussion, and how we get our community pulling in one direction on this topic. So at its core, Hearts in the Ice is really about connecting people to a global dialogue around climate change and also climate action. So why I went, it is because Sunniva invited me. So she turned up at the front desk one day, a few weeks before she left for Norway, and said to the front desk, I have to talk to the mayor. I'm going on this project. I'm going to be in the Arctic for 9 months, and I really think that Squamish needs to be part of the conversation. And so that's how Sunniva arrived in my office. Just was walking by City Hall and decided to come in. And by the end of the meeting, she said, you know what, you should just come on the launch expedition. So what it is Hearts in the Ice has been 4 years in the making. So it's 2 women, Sunniva Sorby, and who's a local, and Hilda Fallon, and she is from Norway. Both women are polar explorers, polar ambassadors. Sunniva primarily in the Antarctic. She led the first female expedition to the South Pole on skis. She is an adventurer at her core. Hilda has been the same, leading female expeditions in the Arctic region for many, many years. So they will be in a little trapper's hut on the Svalbard archipelago called Bamsabu for 9 months. So they've been there for about a month. I actually got a voicemail from Sunniva yesterday. She called, which was exciting to hear. They're just about to enter their 3 months of complete darkness. So I believe October 26th is the last day they will see the sun for 3 months, which is scary when there's more polar bears than people. They're about 140 kilometers away from closest civilization. They are doing 6 citizen science projects while they're there. And then twice a month they're connecting to classrooms around the world through a group called Explore by the Seat of Your Pants. And they host these online conversations with scientists who are in remote regions around the world. It's a pretty cool organization. And their mission, as I said, is really to engage a global community in a dialogue. I also had a day and a bit to spend in Oslo, and I was able to connect with a woman there who works for an organization called Zero, which works at the intersection of business and government around climate action. And so I'll have some thoughts to share about that conversation as well. So this is Bamsabu, and Councillor Anderson can correct my pronunciation as we go along here. I'm going to do my best. So the 9 months is really about research, education, engagement, and connection. And those vertical poles along the side are there to try and prevent polar bears from breaking in. And I have to say, when I was standing outside of it, I didn't feel confident that that was really all going to work, but whatever. Hilda seems very confident that she can scare away a polar bear. She's had over 200 polar bear encounters and seems quite handy with a gun. So citizen science is really at the heart of what they're up to up there. So they are doing phytoplankton studies for the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Just since 2011, have scientists been really trying to understand what phytoplankton do in the polar winter. So this is a great opportunity to have these 2 women collecting water samples and sending them off at the end to the Scripps Institute. Phytoplankton provide 50% of our oxygen on the planet. So these tiny, tiny creatures are a big, important part of our life on Earth. They're looking at cloud formation and the aurora borealis for NASA. They're observing sea ice changes and wildlife for the Norwegian Polar Institute. They are of course, looking at ocean plastics. And so they are dissecting any dead birds they find, primarily fulmars. They'll take the plastic out of their stomach linings and send it away for analysis once they're done, just to try and understand the types of plastics that are getting into this ecosystem. They're testing drone technology out of BCNT. Bombardier has given them an electric snowmobile, so they are playing around with that up there. That gets more difficult to charge over the next 90 days because their solar panels won't work. So it'll be interesting. And then they're testing power systems in remote and cold climates. And then, of course, I mentioned they're connecting with students on a variety of topics over the next 9 months. And this morning, I was at Mamcombe Elementary in Kirsten Solid's grade 5-6 class. And so we connected live with Sinneba and Hilda. And Kim Holman, who is the head of the Norwegian Polar Institute, was their guest scientist this morning. So we were talking about climate change. And it was super fun, and Squamish got to ask an extra question because Sinneba was like, my people get to, got a little bit of favoritism this morning. But it was really, really wonderful to spend that time with this group of students who are really working to understand the science, right? So that's Greta Thunberg's sort of big thing, is listen to the science. And so our conversation this morning was about the kinds of questions we should be asking, and, you know, what's the curiosity that we want to follow? What are the questions we want to ask about what we learned about the Arctic and how it might apply in the Squamish context? So it was a really fun organization, and I just really want to thank Ms. Solid for letting me in her classroom, and also Ryan Massey, their principal, who has been very open to this conversation, really, and promoting it in his school. So that's where I was this morning. It was a lot of fun. Probably more fun than being in this room sometimes. So quick facts about Svalbard. You can see where the North Pole is, that red dot in the middle. Svalbard archipelago is situated between 74 and 81 degrees north. It's about 1,300 kilometers from the North Pole. Longyearbyen is the city that you fly into. City, it's a town. About 2,100 people live on the archipelago. They do claim that there's more polar bears than people. I don't know if that's entirely true, but it's kind of their tourism claim to fame. And what I learned, and I think this is the part that was quite humbling, is that climate change is really taking hold there and is changing their way of life now, not in the future, absolutely now. And I'll share some examples of how that is. So I just want to share, this is a visualization. So when Kim Holman, so we got lectures on the boat from some of the guests that were there. And Kim showed this. And it's how average global temperature has changed from 1883 until now. So in the 1880s, we were able to start really collecting sort of consistent data about world temperatures. And as you can see, the poles are really, the North Pole especially, has just accelerated in warming over the rest of the planet. So that was, of course, you know, pictures speak louder than words. The room was pretty silent after that. So what we know is that the Arctic is warming faster than any other area on the planet. The Canadian report that came out earlier this year from our federal government identified that Canada is warming twice as fast as the rest of the world, and our Arctic is already up 2.3 degrees Celsius. So when we talk about limiting, you know, global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we have to understand that we've already way surpassed that in the northern regions, and there's really not a going back to. This is now just trying to keep it as low as possible. So it was confronting to sort of realize that we've blown way past that sort of limit that scientists have said is an average, and how it is impacting life up north. So Svalbard has experienced 105 consecutive months of above average temperatures. That's 8 3/4 years. 3 months of each of those years, the sun does not shine, and yet their temperature is still above average. Their winter temperature on average is up 10 degrees, and that is a huge difference between the type of precipitation that falls there, the formation of sea ice, melting of glaciers, that sort of thing. So Kim talked a lot about the fact that sea ice no longer forms along the western side of the archipelago and how that is decreasing habitat for animals and a way of life for the people up there. So I wanted to share this little video about sea ice. The volume on this might be really loud. Who controls the volume? Is that me or Kelsey or you, Jaden?
I can try from here. Here's one button. to
Okay,
reduce
when
the
I
volume.
tested this earlier, it was really loud, so. So this is the Arctic sea ice every week since 1990.
"20 to 30 years ago, the sea ice covering the Arctic Ocean was dominated by ice that was many years old. This core of old ice survived all year round. Around this core, a smaller fringe of seasonal ice froze each winter and thawed each summer. Old ice eventually drifted out of the Arctic through the Fram Strait. New batches of old ice were built in the Beaufort Gyre. The gyre was a nursery where young ice grew thicker and stronger as it drifted around for many years. Today, summers in the southern branch of the Beaufort Gyre are often too warm for ice to survive. As a result, the amount of thick, old ice in the Arctic has declined significantly. In its place is young, thin ice that's likely to melt in the summer. The small amount of old, thick ice makes the Arctic vulnerable to extreme ice retreat in very warm summers. It's a situation that keeps Arctic wildlife and the people who live there poised on the edge of dramatic and possibly irreversible change."
So this is why we are looking at an ice-free Arctic, and it is because our old ice has dramatically disappeared. And what Kim Holman says is that, you know, fjords where they used to have like ice every winter, there's just no ice forming whatsoever. And this certainly has implications for our north as well. So this is the main street in Longyearbyen. The melting permafrost is one of the big changes that they're really struggling with right now. They've taken down hundreds of homes in the last few years. So I believe it was 2015 or 17. They're experiencing avalanches that they never had before, and I'll show some pictures in a minute about how steep the slopes are around this community. But that was one of the things that prompted Hilda to start really thinking about climate changes, that she lost two of her friends as an avalanche ripped through homes not 10 meters from where she lived. They lost two people. Rock slides are a reality. The seed vault for the world is in Longyearbyen, one of, or sort of the largest vault, seed vault in the world. So it is a repository for food-producing seeds from all over the world, and countries deposit their seeds there. And they've had to rebuild the entrance in the last few years because the melting permafrost has sent water down into the vault, which of course is not really what you want to have happen in your international seed vault. The homes were built on wooden pilings, and so you can, you know, knock a wooden piling into the permafrost, and as long as that permafrost stays frozen, that wood piling is not going to rot. And that's the problem, is that they're all rotting now because the permafrost is starting to melt. So they're having to rebuild in a much more expensive way with steel. And it just means basically slowly dismantling parts of the town and then investing in new housing further away from the slopes and with a new type of construction. So that adaptation is happening. In sort of the natural environment, there's a term that we were talking about on the boat called Atlantification. And so the average water temperature around Svalbard is already up 2 degrees from their normal. And so they're seeing the impacts to wildlife. And one of the reasons why ice isn't forming along the western side is because that Gulf Stream can come up much higher. And it's changing the fish that are there, as well as big impacts on polar bear, beluga, and seals in that region. So it was, I guess I feel like we live in a bit of a bubble, because although we've had some wildfire seasons and maybe some hotter, drier summers, we can't specifically sort of point to some of the wildlife around here and say, look at how they're having to adapt. Whereas up there, it's become very obvious to them. I really like this sign in Longyearbyen, please do not park your dog here. There's lots of dogs up there. But I don't know if you can see the houses back there, but in front there's a whole bunch of snowmobiles out there. It's more than one snowmobile per person in that town. So that's really how they get around in the winter. And you can see the remnants of the coal industry there. I mean, that was the ironic part, is that we actually boarded the ship from a coal export facility. And, you know, Norway's not perfect. There's still a bit of a mining.
Russian, actually.
And it's Russian up there, but there is an export facility. And Longyearbyen is actually named after, now I feel like Councillor Henderson, John Longyear, who's an American who traveled there in the early 1900s and saw the opportunity for mining. So went as a tourist and then came back with a whole bunch of miners, and the town is named after him. And he started to exploit the mining aspect of the town. So the thing to remember too is they're now getting rain in Longyearbyen in the winter, and none of their infrastructure is built for rain. It's built for snow and quite a dry climate. So that's another thing that they're grappling with. So as you can see, the slopes around the town are very steep. When everything stayed frozen, this was not a risk. And so now with permafrost melting and the ground melting, those slopes become more unstable. The picture in the bottom right is, can you see the bowl on the mountain on the right? There's a bowl of snow there, and then below it there's like a little line of snow. So apparently, so this is the folklore in Longyearbyen, when those two connect, winter has started. And when they disconnect, it's the first day of spring. So they place bets on when that happens. So winter hasn't started yet when I was there. This is the ship we were on. I don't have really good sea legs, I'll say that much. Spent the first night with my feet on the floor, lying down with my eyes closed after dinner. This is the route we took. Sorry, there's some reflection from the lamps on the boat, but basically we made 5 different stops. The boat up at the top is where we started. That's Longyearbyen. The first stop, as you go in the middle, that's where Bamsabu is. Then we went further south to explore some of the fjords down south. Back up to drop Hilda and Sunniva off, and then back up to Longyearbyen. And every time we got on and off the boat, we had to go through this to keep our boots clean. They don't want to transfer seeds, dirt from one part of the archipelago to another. So that was just a precaution. So this is our arrival at Bamsabu. So we traveled overnight, and this is that was a porthole from my little tiny, very ground, or sea water level. Yeah, it was not pleasant that first night. Anyway, Bamsabu sits at the base of those mountains. Bamsabu is in a national park, so everything you see there is got a historical nature. You can't touch anything, not a rock, not a bone, not an old ship, not a piece of wood. They consider everything to be part of their heritage. You could see these piles of white sort of on the shore. You couldn't tell what it was from where we were on the ship, and that's sort of Bamsabu from a distance. It's not really much to look at. Those piles of white rocks are actually below the bones from hunting days, and there were some hunting boats along the shore. So it's quite a large bay, that area, and so the whalers, at a time when they were using whale oil, would just put nets across the entrance to the bay and just systematically take the belugas out. They're shore-dwelling creatures. And it was really hard, actually, when you went to the museum in Longyearbyen, you sort of go through their hunting history. It's like, oh, we hunted the whales till almost extinction. So then we moved on to walruses, and we hunted them till almost extinction. And then we moved on to, it took a while for us to learn some lessons up there. Polar bears haven't been hunted since the 70s on Svalbard, so they're no longer afraid of humans. They're actually very curious about humans up there. So this is Bamsabu. That's the back. You can see they've started to stockpile wood, so there's no trees on Svalbard, so they depend on driftwood. So they've been madly out collecting driftwood. from nearby shores and out in the open ocean and pulling it ashore and then chopping it up. They have added solar panels to the cabin. Of course, those won't be useful for the next 3 months, but will provide power once the sun comes up. That's a big water tank, so fresh water is hard to come by. They said to the kids this morning that there are a few little icebergs that have floated into the bay, so they're chipping it off those. They're chipping water off of glaciers when they're close by, and then they chip it out of their water tanks. And those are food barrels there that you see. Apparently bear-proof, and they're hoping that is true. And then the bottom picture, bottom right, is a sauna that they built. It's on skis, so we're wondering if they're actually going to move it around, to their favorite location, have a little sauna, move it back. But I thought that was a nice addition to the rustic nature of Bombsaboo. So there's just a few pictures from inside. So this is. See the window at the back in between the wood? So this is looking out that window. There were 5 people in that room. It was very crowded. There seems to be a bed in there. Where Sunniva and I are standing is where the power systems are. There's some storage, and there's a small room in front of us that was absolutely packed to the rafters with stuff, and there seemed to be another small bed in there, although no one was sleeping in that bed until they figured out where all their gear was going to go. And then, of course, the door has the polar bear sign on it to remind them always to be mindful when they walk out the door. So they can't leave the cabin without a weapon. That is the power system that they're working with, so collecting energy from wind, solar. It's got some batteries, so some storage as part of it. That is a picture of the electric snowmobile that had to be craned onto this very rickety boat and taken ashore. We all watched that for a while. And that is the Iridium satellite system that they're connecting to schools with. So they're the first civilian group to have access to that system. Usually it's deployed with the military or with NGOs on missions, that sort of thing. So it was very cool that they got to use that. This is just some of the scenery so we got to walk out behind Bombsaboo. It's just really very spectacular. There's a reindeer. I don't know if you can see him in that little picture. They taste like lamb. Got to try it. And they're allowed to hunt one reindeer while they're there. So they are in a national park, but they got permission to do a bit of hunting if they want. Recherche Brie, which is basically a research glacier, I think. If I'm not mistaken. It's a bit hard to tell, but you can see the glacier scouring up on the mountains on the bottom right picture. You can see where there's lighter soil and then it turns to dark. There's quite a line there. So in the 1920s, that's where the glacier was, up at that level. So this is the retreat since the 20s. So Kim talked a lot about how animals are adapting up there, and he sort of put up not the same, but similar pictures. So this is a polar bear hunting ring seal when there's lots of sea ice. They basically just plunk down near an air hole and hunt that way. When there's less sea ice, they're now hunting from the water, and so they ambush them. They swim up behind an ice floe and jump out and try and surprise them and get them that way. One of the things they're a little bit concerned about is that female polar bears can get pregnant, but they will hold the pregnancy. They won't allow it to progress unless they're fat enough. And so there's a lot of curiosity around, will the polar bear's fertility decline? Because in hunting, by swimming a lot, you expend more energy. Are they getting the same amount of food? The ring seal requires the sea ice for its breeding purposes, and pups stay on the sea ice. So without sea ice, they're worried that their food source will decline. So this is why scientists are so worried about polar bears. And that's why Sunniva and Hilda are looking at sea ice formation where they are, as well as polar bear behavior. Okay, there's polar bear footprints in the upper right, and there's polar bears in the 2 other pictures. So this is the closest I got to a polar bear. There's one right there. And there's one right there. So yeah, not too close. Which was sad, but also I think I was okay with. I do want to talk a little bit about belugas. So I shot this video. And there, that's how close to me they are. So there was probably about 10 right there, but in the whole bay there was maybe about 50 or 60. It was pretty cool. What they're noticing in the belugas on the western side of Svalbard is that they're shore-dwelling whales. They don't mind the shallow water. They use it to keep their skin clean. Their traditional food source is Arctic cod. As the temperatures have warmed, the Arctic cod have gone further north. And so they've had to move into open water, and they seem to be able to transition. They're now eating the Atlantic cod, which doesn't seem to be a problem for them, except that now there's no sea ice really forming on the western side. And so belugas, narwhals, are prey to orcas, and they would go under the sea ice to escape them. And now that there's no sea ice, they're going out into open water to look for their food source. And so scientists are now tagging belugas. They're trying to find out how much predation is happening from orcas on the western side of the island because of this whole Atlantification process. So,
Because the orcas have the fins, they can't get under the sea ice.
correct. That's how they get away from orcas. They're not really good for going under ice. Reindeer is another species that they're watching. Picture on the left is the largest plant I saw while I was there. Reindeer primarily eat lichen. They scrape it off the rocks. They live for about 8 to 9 years because that's how long their teeth last from scraping lichen off rocks, and then they die of starvation, basically. What they're finding with the rising temperature, well, that's the reality, is that it's raining. And so in July, they found 200 carcasses of reindeer that had starved to death. And what scientists are thinking happened is that it rained in their range and then turned to ice, and they could no longer scrape through the ice to get to the lichen. They couldn't get to their food source. So that is one of the ways that this changing temperature is requiring these animals to adapt. And the one on the bottom right is a reindeer eating seaweed. So they've started to explore different alternatives.
Sushi.
So
Are they wild?
these are wild. And so again, quite a healthy population, but a population that they're keeping an eye on. They are noticing that when they eat seaweed, they also return to their natural foraging. They don't think seaweed's providing all the nutrients that they're used to. And the weight of an average Svalbard reindeer, they're the smallest reindeer species, has dropped almost 20 kilos. Because they're just harder to get at the food. So yeah, there's a lot of stress on the natural environment because of the changes they're seeing out there. So I think the big thing for Sunniva and Hilda around why citizen science is so important is that in a changing world, when scientists are trying to model how things are changing and how they will change in the future, the more data they have, the better. And so citizen science become really important data points all over the world. And this is why, people said, how they get connected to like Scripps and NASA and the Norwegian Polar Institute. And scientists can't be everywhere. They don't have the money to do that. So citizen science becomes an absolute crucial part of how we're going to monitor and model climate change going forward, because we become the way in which scientists get their data. And we, of course, know we have citizen scientists that are already working in Squamish. I mean, John Buchanan is a great example of someone who's been following our herring stocks and how that's changed over time. So just a few more pictures. Endless glaciers coming down to the ocean. I mean, it was just spectacular scenery. And I wish you all could have gone with me. My friend Karen actually stayed an extra day. I met her on the boat. She's from Sydney, Australia. She got a bit closer to a polar bear, so I'll throw those in. These are not my pictures. And that is an Arctic blue fox, very rare, very endangered, hunting for crabs and that along the shore. And this polar bear was very curious. He came into the water and kept diving down under the water, and every time he popped up, he was closer to the boat. So they realized they were changing his behavior, so they left him alone. Yeah, pretty special creature. And these are just some of the cabins that are sort of dotted around Svalbard. People will use these to hunt. They're like hunting cabins, and also summer cabins. People will go up there in the summer because they have 24 hours of daylight and enjoy the outdoors there. So it was a spectacular place. So we'll leave Svalbard for a minute. I just want to touch on Oslo. I had a day and a half to spend in Oslo. So much of their downtown they've given over to the pedestrian realm. So this is right in the heart of downtown. And I was there midweek, so this is like maybe 4 or 5 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. Really vibrant, just no noise, and just made me think that we should maybe experiment with a few car-free weekends downtown, or at least on some of the streets. It really changes the whole atmosphere and what you can do with the streetscape in terms of entertainment, dining, art, street furniture. I mean, it was just fantastic. So these are just a few more shots. So imagine Yaletown with no cars. So they've created this whole part of their downtown in the last 8 years. And the only evidence I could find that there were cars is that driveway going underneath the ground at sort of the edge of it. Otherwise, there was an area the size of Yaletown. I never saw a car. And then you'd see these signs that said delivery trucks, where, you could go at certain hours of the day, delivery trucks could go in and service the commercial aspect of those. Otherwise, I don't know, people walked. It was amazing. It was amazing to see a city, a huge portion of a city designed around people, not cars. That dock at the bottom, is right on the edge of this sort of Yaletown-like structure, and it was a way to connect people to the water. So that's their working sort of port. There's ferries going in and out of there, lots of boat traffic, but they sort of made sure that people still had access to the water in the summer. So there's a little bridge that connects to that dock, and there's a diving board, and people can sit out there. And then just the big planters that go all down one of the main streets downtown. So it was just, it inspired me that you can actually build a city around people, not cars. The interesting thing is they have a 50% adoption rate for EV vehicles. Never saw one electric charger downtown. And so I asked someone, I said, where do people charge their cars? They said, at home. Everyone's got a charger at home. So I figured I don't think that was the whole story. It makes me want to ask more questions, and I'm really glad I got to speak to Jenny at Zero, because now I can go back to her with those kinds of questions. But, we talk about needing more and more infrastructure downtown, and I think we do need it in some respects for tourists. And one thing someone said to me is, we have them outside of town because everyone needs to be able to get to their cabin. So I guess everyone in Oslo likes to have like a cottage or a cabin. So they have charging stations to make sure everyone can get to their cabin, but not really in the city. They take transit or they drive in and have enough charge to get home again. So the city itself hasn't invested hugely in that infrastructure on the street. So this is a video I'll play in a second. One of the things Jenny talked about, and I think this is important for us as a city, is that the city is a convener of dialogue. And so when they are about to make a big, bold climate policy shift, they bring together the stakeholders into the room and they talk about why they want to do it and the challenges that they see and also the opportunities they see. That gives a chance for the business community to weigh in, as well as a civil society group like Zero. So while I was talking to Jenny, she said, well, one of the ways we've done this is around our first fossil fuel-free construction site. And she said, you can see it, it's just down the road from where we're having coffee. And so I went to visit this. So Oslo's working towards all of their infrastructure builds being fossil fuel free. So they met with industry, they convened this dialogue and said, here's what we want to do. We want equipment that will build roads, build buildings that doesn't use fossil fuels. Industry provided feedback, they talked about timelines. By the time Oslo was ready to put out that RFP, they knew that there were people ready to bid on it. So I think the key thing for us as a city is that we have an opportunity as we make policy decisions to create some certainty in the market. And I know our term is only 4 years, but there's a business case about why you would have an electric excavator. You save on fuel costs, you create a more pleasant work environment for the operator and the people working near them. There is no complaints from the neighbors, it's really quiet. And so business could sort of work with the idea that, okay, if going forward, we know Oslo's RFPs are all going to come out with this knowledge that they have to be fossil fuel free, you can create the business case for why you would invest in retrofitting your excavator or your backhoe or that sort of thing. So this is just a short video, but I don't know why the video is shaky. It doesn't look like that. It is a fluid movement. And so it's just plugged in. You can see the plug hanging off the back. And then the city provides a big transformer for it to plug into. And really, they just ripped out the diesel engine and put in a big heavy battery pack.
Where do they get their power from?
Well, that's the thing in Norway. It's not all hydroelectric, and they're transitioning off of coal. They do burn a lot of waste, so they do waste to energy. But yeah, that's one of the things that Norway is working on is clean energy. That's one of the advantages we have here in British Columbia.
Norway is a major exporter of hydroelectric power. They actually are not into waste to energy as much as their neighbours in countries which don't have those hydro resources. Or Norway is a major exporter of electricity to Germany. And today the biggest political issue is wind power. And the public in many parts of the country are not prepared to buy into wind power, wind turbine parks because of the disturbance to nature, if you like. Very big debate. Mm-hmm. But that again is for export, electricity for export to Germany mostly. And it's German financing of these electrical installations.
So it was interesting because Jenny told me about their plans to create fossil fuel-free ports. So they have 85 ferries that are currently electric or in production, either running. So 85 they're either running or in production that are electric, which makes you curious about why we're transitioning to LNG ferries. If Norway's already got electric ones, sort of think, why can't we get one of those? They're talking about making some of their national parks, especially where there's fjords that people want to visit, requiring access to the fjords to be fossil fuel free. And I think it's through this idea of dialogue and working with your stakeholders, not just working in isolation and saying, well, we heard this was a good idea, so we're going to do it. They seem to be wanting to lay the foundation, create the certainty, hear from business about how fast they can make the transition, what the risks are for them, and finding that way to keep moving the dial on climate change action without unnecessarily stressing out their economy. It's a fascinating thing for us to think about how we'll engage the different sectors in our community as our climate leadership team works with staff to come up with the bold climate moves, and how we engage just our everyday citizens as well as the business world and the development community to sort of get behind a way forward. But you absolutely have to be solution focused. But the Norwegians I talked to while I was away, I said, oh, you just seem so much further ahead than we are. And they're like, yeah, but we haven't done enough. At the Heads of Mission event we had a couple of weeks ago, starting the Minister of Finland, and their countries just identified 2036 as their carbon neutral year. So We haven't even set a target for 2050 as a country, and Scandinavian countries are pulling in their carbon neutral goals well into the next 20 years. So I'm fascinated by this. I'm fascinated by what we can learn from these countries. You know, our climates are not too dissimilar in some respects. We share some of the same industries, and I, you know, when all is said and done, I've made connections with people working on this from the U.S., from Europe, and I hope to be able to tap into those connections as we go forward and are making our decisions about where to go from here. Anyway, I'll leave it at that, and if you have any questions, happy to answer those, but mostly just wanted everyone to see that we're not only just fighting for our environment. I actually feel like we have a duty to those folks up in Svalbard and our own Arctic who are already going to be grappling with irreversible change. And so what's our part in making sure that we're reining in our own footprint on their behalf? Thanks.
I wondered if you'd heard if there's any Russian participation or collaboration with some of the citizen science or some of the work there. Until recently, there was a number of Russian people living in Longyearbyen working in the mine. Was there any connection to schools, for example, in Russia?
I didn't hear about any of that, Councillor Anderson, but there are a number of research stations in the Svalbard Peninsula, one south and one north of Longyearbyen, and many countries are participating in that research through those centers. And there's also a university in Longyearbyen, and there potentially is some connection with Russia through that. But I didn't ask that question specifically.
We're limited with time, so
Are we under time?
just barely.
Okay. I just got a news feed this morning that New York City has adopted Oslo's model of a climate budget for the city of New York. And I wasn't aware that Oslo was the first city to implement a climate budgeting process, something that no doubt will be well available for us to consult.
I did hear about this, and something that I wanted to look into, but and someone else, UBCM, mentioned Oslo's climate budget to me. So it'll be an interesting model to take a look at.
Bamsabu is home of the teddy bear. Cabin.
Wow. See, now I did not know that.
And with that, I'm going to look for a motion to terminate. Councillor Hereford, Councillor Stoller,
Awesome.
all in favor? Thank you.